Good morning. A number of years ago now, when I sort of first came out, as it were, as a committed Christian, I had a number of really quite shocking experiences. I went to the pub with some friends of mine, and halfway through, when we were putting the world to rights as you do, one of my friends just came out with, well, Christianity has caused more deaths and more problems in the world than anything else. We'd be better off if all Christians died. Now, I didn't take this too well. I'm sitting there with my friend, and there's another friend there who's also a Christian. And I responded quite badly to that. It was a real shock. I told him, well, if that's how he felt, we shouldn't be there drinking with him. My friend stepped in a very thoughtful way and started asking a few questions. I was really impressed how he diffused the situation and where all this came from. It was only a few years later, when I was studying theology, that I found something called apologetics, defending the faith. We actually did a course on it. And interestingly, things changed after that. I remember just after doing that course, going to my Ash Wednesday service, and then Elliot, my son, ringing up and asking me to pick him up from work. So off I duly went, and he then told me he was going to be half an hour later. So I nipped into the Wetherspoons next door and got a drink. Stood at the bar, it was very strange to notice that everybody was looking at me in a funny way. And eventually, a young woman came up to me and said, can I ask you something? And I went, oh, yeah, okay, fine. And she said, why is that black cross on your forehead? Of course, I realised at that point that I'd simply forgotten to wash it off after the service. But what came from it was me ending up sitting with her group and talking about Ash Wednesday, talking about Christ, talking about belief and how it affects the way you live in the world. Now, in our reading today, Christ says, if the world hates you, remember they hated me first. And then offers the Spirit to come and speak on his behalf, but also says, and you as well must testify for me. Now, of course, the disciples had been with Jesus and had learned at Jesus' feet for several years. So, while the Spirit might be there to support them, Jesus is also saying, well, you can do something here as well. And I wonder whether that's something we don't do much of as Christians. Think about how we might defend the faith, how we might testify to Christ's work in our lives and in the world. My better response now to somebody who says to me, well, the world would be better off without Christianity, why don't we kill all Christians, is to say, well, let's have a think about history and apologise, really, for the dreadful things that have happened around the church over history. But let's have a think about that. What happens when we remove Christianity from a society, or religion as a whole? What happened in the French Revolution? What happened when Pol Pot took power? What happened when Hitler pushed religion aside? You get mass genocide. You get death on an industrial scale. And actually, I can speak about that with people now in a fairly open way and say, well, who do we think the perpetrators of this awful things are? Even if the name of Christianity is used, the common denominator is people. And people seem to do better if they've got some spirituality or Christianity in their lives than they do if it is removed completely. There's just one simple answer. But other questions keep coming up. How can we expect to believe in an invisible thing? Surely science has all the answers. Surely we are emotional animals and there is no other. It's just our psychology making us think that God exists. These are questions that normal people will ask us, and I can understand why quite often we're scared or worried about opening up about that stuff. As I found with the cross on my forehead going out there, if you've had just a little bit of thought and training on this stuff, you can respond in the moment. The Spirit will move you, and you can open up and answer the questions. So I'd encourage you today to have a think about perhaps preparing yourself for being in the world as we come out of lockdown. Perhaps so that when these questions are asked, you're not just stuck, or you don't respond how I did, with a bit of anger and frustration because you didn't know which way to turn. We could perhaps even run a course on apologetics, or do it through home groups and things like that. And there are a number of books that really work for me. This one's great. It's by Francis Spufford. It's very down to earth. I rather like this as well. How to be a bad Christian. It's really well written. Works very well for young people. And here's a more academic approach, Why God Won't Go Away, by Alistair McGrath. And we live in a postmodern society where we actually have a voice now. We're not, we may be such Christians on the margins, but our voice is as good as anybody's. And I'd encourage us as a Christian community to think about apologetics in a structured way, so that we also can be advocates for Christ. Have a great rest of the day.